Hi, everybody, and welcome to our live debate, The Era for Change. My name's Gareth Jones, and I'm the CEO of Headstart, and we are a software company that hopefully helps organizations hire diverse leaders. And we won't focus on that. We can talk about that more offline. Today, we're hosting what hopefully will be a live and great lively debate around the issue of, I guess, ultimately diversity in the workplace within organizations. And to provide a bit of context for that, we in sort of Headstart, I guess, has a purpose ultimately to level the playing field for everybody who passes through our system and to create, I guess, more diverse organizations down the funnel. And in part of doing what we were doing, we did a piece of research this year in the summer, the late summer, I guess in the light of George Floyd's rather tragic death and the spotlight then being focused more broadly on diversity in organizations. And that research was really about is the American dream and other, I suppose, opportunity promises still relevant, given that we find ourselves in 2020 with many challenges around the notion of diversity or opportunity for people globally and socially. And when we talk about the American dream, I just wanted to kind of read a few words to sort of encapsulate that. And that is, the American dream is ultimately a promise. It says that everyone should be able to achieve the highest place in society that they're capable of through hard work and determination. And that they should be able to do this regardless of, as novelist James Truslow Adams puts it, the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position. On the back of this research, which drove some shocking statistics, but maybe they're not that shocking. And if you'd like a copy of the research, please do let us know in the comments or ping us afterwards. We'll happily forward or go to our website. We can show you that. But on the back of that, we wanted to kind of open up a bit of a debate about that and to understand whether things are going to change, whether this is the time for change, whether the unfortunate events of this year, including others, that puts the spotlight on possibly people who have less opportunity than others in the light of COVID particularly, and to see whether, and to get a view, I guess, from other experts around in the world of work as to whether this is still achievable. And if so, what's getting in the way and whether we can do anything about it. And hopefully what we're going to be doing is diving into a number of questions. Where do we find ourselves now? There's a lot of activity going on, a lot of pledges being made. Will that make a difference? What do we need to do as leaders in organizations to make a difference and to grasp the moment, I guess? And what are the things we need to prioritize? So to do that today, I'm super excited to say that I'm joined by three experts from across the talent and diversity spectrum who can help, I guess, get into this debate. And our guests are, so I'll start with Dr. Brandi Baldwin. She's the CEO at Millennial Ventures and founder of Calling All Allies, a project that helps to organize organizations to quickly and purposely make progress on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Welcome, Brandi. Great to see you here. We also have Melinda Walega. She is the VP of Talent Acquisition and DEI Champion at Schneider Electric North America, an energy management and automation company. So Melinda will bring, hopefully, a deep corporate perspective to the debate. And then we have Torin Ellis. Torin and I shared a stage earlier in the year at an inclusion conference. Torin is a diversity strategist renowned for his direct and honest approach to helping organizations tackle D&I issues. There will be two sort of broad components to the debate today. So for the first half, we're going to be opening up to a number of questions and start a debate, I guess, on the floor to see, unearth some of the things that I've talked about. At some point, and after about 20 minutes, we'll do an audience poll using the Q&A panel on the right of the viewing screen. If you're watching this via the live stream on social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc., or YouTube, and you want to get involved, then simply go to our website www.headstart.io. If you look at the top of the page, you'll see a Watch Now banner. click on that and you can participate. And you can also obviously ask questions or give opinions to the panel, and we will pick those out as we go. And then once we've done the audience poll, we'll get into another round of questions and debate. And what we'd really like is to include some of your thoughts and views. I know we've got several hundred people on the webinar live right now. So please do, as we're going through, share your opinions, not just questions, and we can pick those up as we go. And hopefully by the end of the session, we will perhaps all be a bit more empowered to see how we can drive change. We'll perhaps all be a bit more curious. I know that's one of Torin's things, is to be curious, ask questions, and understand what's going on, and understand what we can do to make a change in ourselves, perhaps in others. So let's jump in. Hopefully everybody's online but live, and no online meeting these days can start without a quiz. So I have a question for the panel. Don't worry, it's not that taxing. But obviously in doing research and looking around at, I guess, inspired by the pledges that we're seeing everywhere at the moment. I mean, LinkedIn particularly is a forum where we're seeing lots of activity around the debate, and we're having big news about organizations, particularly large technical tech businesses and others, making big pledges towards, I guess, diversity and inclusion initiatives. But the question I have for the panel is two parts. So over the last 10 years, or since 2011, this is data that was provided by an organization called Candid, who measures funding and granting and pledges of cash towards, in their terms, racial equality in the US. And what I'd like to ask you guys to try and get a stab at is, how much value in dollars do you think has been given in that last 10 years or so, 9 or 10 years, in the US in terms of dollars? And how much of that has been pledged since May, when the unfortunate circumstances around George Floyd's death came into the public consciousness? Who's going to have a stab?
I'll go with $10 billion. And first of all, good morning. We are just days before the holiday season. COVID cases are still rising. We got babies at the border still separated from their parents. We got individuals still arguing whether or not racism is a thing. We sent a spaceship to the moon last week, yet we are having this conversation today about recruiting Black and brown people, LGBTQ people, folks with disabilities. And so when you ask that question, Garrett, about how much has been pledged, my guess, I don't know, over the last decade, I think you said, let's go with $10 billion, and let's go with, 20% of that has been pledged since May of George Floyd.
Brandi?
Now, I personally have no clue. I have no guess, no range at all that I could possibly give. What I know is that there's been a lot pledged this year, as well as years prior, the date that you gave, 2011. But whatever's been pledged, I'm going to take a stab and say it has not necessarily even been used the right way and in the right spaces to actually cause, significant change. And so throwing money at problems without actually being strategic is nothing that is actually going to help, especially in the DEI space. So I'm not even going to get in the game. I'll piggyback off Torin with his numbers, but I think it's less about the numbers and more about what we're doing with the money that we have. But we'll see. Melinda, I don't know. You may have something different to add.
So I would say, being as part of corporate America, we definitely do a lot of funding and foundation work. But clearly this year is where we actually took a step in dividing out money specifically for DEI. And so I would guess that we probably increased maybe 20-30% in the past year. But I would have no idea, just like Brandi, on what the last 10 years has been in totality. So 10 billion, 20 billion, but clearly this past year, I think we increased significantly.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Good guess, Torin, at the 10 billion. It's actually 14.2 billion according to their numbers. the more staggering statistic is that 66% of that has been pledged, given in the last since May, basically. And obviously the vast majority of that has gone actually directly to initiatives that are labelled under the George Floyd subject, which is astounding statistic.
Hey, in the words of Russell Simmons, he used to say at the end of every show, "God, thank you all for coming. God bless. Good night." Like, actually, that could really be the entire session right there. The fact that people wanted to pay attention this year and decide that as corporate citizens they wanted to do better, it should automatically challenge each and every one of us to say, what are we going to do differently after we stuff ourselves with turkey and cranberry sauce in the next couple of days? On Monday, what will we do differently so that in 2021 we're not having the same conversation? That is exactly what that 66% should tell each and every one of us.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It is quite staggering. And to your point, Brandi, how is that money being used? And this isn't new. I'm unfortunately been around the working environment for 32 years, and I guess this came starkly into my consciousness a number of years ago with Rodney King, which was probably the first time it became very public. And obviously that led to a lot of social disruption, but it also put the spotlight again back on in the corporate world where I was working. And despite the fact that a lot of that money has only been spent in the last 6 months, over the years, we've had these repeated, I suppose, moments where it's come up in our consciousness, and organizations have been trying to do things about it. And then again, in the last 6 or 8 years, we've seen organizations being public about what they're trying to do and their measurements, and things. The dial is moving incredibly slowly. And how do we move from pledges and commitments to actual action? I mean, I know it's difficult to completely move the needle internally within a large organization, but it feels to me like it's moving a lot slower. So given that we're here right now, do you think that we're actually at a tipping point that is remarkably different from any time we've been in before? And do we feel it's going to make a difference this time?
I'll start by saying this. I really think that it's less so much about fast or slow, and it's more about impact. There are companies that will reach out for support and for actual help. I had a client a while back earlier this year, and they said, I said, let's focus on equity, let's focus on wage comparability, let's focus on policies and procedures. And he said, no, I don't want to do all of that. I'm talking about the tough work. I want to do the tough work, the tough racial equity work. And I said, I'm not sure what tough you're talking about, but you actually have the power. You are a co-founder in this company. You actually can make sure that the policies are equitable. You actually can use the funds in this way. And they were looking for something else that seemed like it was going to move faster or would have a bigger impact. And so I think a lot of this right now is, I think some companies are moving too fast. They're moving too fast in the wrong direction. They might as well be staying still. And if you're talking about impact and what's actually going to change, they actually need to defer to real experts to tell them what to do, not what they think that they should do or that they will feel comfortable with doing. And I think that is going to be the challenge with regard to, is this going to stick? We finally have the money. There finally are funds being allocated, but how many conversations do I have to have with an actual CEO or someone in the C-suite of a company that says, no, we don't want to do that. We want to do this. It's all about optics. It's all about looking like they're doing something, but are they really, trying to make an impact, a long-lasting change? If they're not willing to open up the policies and pull back, the wages and really do that extra step, then they're not. And so I'm concerned, quite frankly, that this sense of urgency is stopping people from actually being a little bit more strategic here.
I think that's a great point. And the fact that, when you look at your policies and practices, I can tell you firsthand, even at our company, we've been talking about pay equity specifically for gender, right? So we started with gender 10 years ago. And if you don't measure it, you will lose traction very quickly. And now we're looking at, pay equity for all. And it should be pay equity for all. But if you don't continue to measure it and make intentional decisions on it, you will lose ground on that. So I think it's a great point. Brandi, about your policies and your practices that are more sustainable, and that cost companies money. I mean, there are commitments there to say, we're serious about this and we're going to continue to look at it and take action.
Your point, Gareth, around whether or not this is something that can be sustained, it really comes down to the individual. And so I think it's about every single individual, not just leadership, although it absolutely starts with leadership, and we need their thrust, we need their support, we need their declaration behind it. But it comes down to every individual. And am I Pollyannish when I say that? A bit. Because I want every single person in the organization to care about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I want every single person to be dialed into how are we advancing these conversations, as it relates to our corporate corridors as well as our communities. I want that. But it will only be intensified, sustained, when we have more people turning the sheets of the music. Dr. Brandi Proctor has over her left shoulder some sheets of music. We need to get people on the same sheet of music. We need to get people, if they're not on the same sheet of music, we need to get them in the same hymn book. If they're not on the same sheet of music in the same hymn book, we need to have them holding a hymn book. We need people moving to make this music the way that it's supposed to be. It just comes down to interest. It comes down to intentionality. It doesn't matter if we make a mistake. We can correct the mistake. But we got you have to do something. You have to do something. And so that is what it's going to require as we can, move through this holiday season and into January of 2021 and beyond.
And let's talk about intentionality, right? What companies out there are doing this for optics? What companies out there want to look like they are, for equity? And what companies are really making sure that even if no one knows, even if they never put a statement on their website, that they are doing things behind the scenes? I think, when you talk about intentionality too, it's really time to shed light on those companies that are posturing, they're performing. And quite frankly, but behind the scenes, their employees know, depending on the level of who the employee is, but they know what's genuine and what's not genuine. And I think that we will need, to your point, Torin, we will need, people throughout the organization to continue to just put a little bit of heat, or at a minimum shine a light on what is, consistent and not consistent. I'm seeing a lot of hypocrisy this year, something that is really not necessary and not needed in this DEI space. And unfortunately, we need folks internally as well as external experts to be able to hold these companies accountable for what they are really doing and why they're doing it. Because once the fad is over and something, another wave is present for them to kind of jump on, they're going to switch gears pretty quickly. That sustainability will not last.
That's a really good point. I mean, being able to make that sustained change, and when you hear what's being said here, you're talking about sustainable activity. Dr. Brandi, you've talked about seeing posturing, despite what we've seen, the verbal commitments or even the financial commitments, and yet we're making all that financial commitment now. But as Melinda pointed out, it costs money to make these things happen. Why haven't we been doing them, and why haven't they made any progress? How do we stop that tail off? Because it's really top of mind now. There are absolutely organizations for all sorts of reasons doing great things, but there are also organizations doing it from an optics perspective. And ultimately that comes down to the leaders. So you, Dr. Brandi, mentioned something earlier, which was the organization you were talking to the leader of the company, the CEO, I guess, the founder of the company that had the power to make these things happen. And yet, time and time again, we diverge into posturing or optics versus actual intent, actual commitment. And the question for me is, can we, this is the whole point of the day, can we really make that change? Can we really change the people? There's that famous thing, I don't know who said it, but if you can't change the people, change the people. And it's so much lies at the heart. Yes, all of us can do something, I guess, in the, at all levels in the organization, put the spotlight on it, raise it, put your hand up. be, I think, as in the post you shared yesterday, Dr. Brandi, be one of those people that somebody, calls it out. Don't be complicit through silence, which is one of the themes of Torin's conversation, the presentation that he did at the event. And I'm asking myself a lot that year, how can I be less silent, not just in my organization, but, outside in the world? I certainly have some fears about that, to be honest. I mean, it's something I'd like to talk about. But how do we change? Melinda, how do you, in your organization, large organization with probably varying, how do you really get people to change if over 10, 15 years they haven't? And how do we know that's real long-term commitment?
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's a great point. And I want to kind of go back to what Dr. Brandi, what you said too. You need expert advice, right? So you can't rely just on your own employees, and especially your minority employees, to educate all of us, right? So one of the things that I think we've all learned is that the burden is on us as leaders. It's on all of us, right? It's not just on the people in our communities that are in the minority. I think the experts, outside of the company that do assess companies, right? That truly, if you want to change, you come in and you open up every part of your organization to an external company to audit your practices, and really assess you and say, here's where your gaps are, and be real about the commitment that it takes to change for that sustainability. Because companies that are diverse do outperform. So even when you want to look at what's the business imperative, it's proven that you perform better, higher profitability when you are diverse, when you represent the markets and the customers that you want to go do business with and the communities you live in. It is real. And the companies that get that will make the commitments to change. But I do think they need some outside expertise. I don't think they can rely on their own understanding and their own ways of working.
Just on that note, there are many parts of business that, whether that be logistics, supply chain in a large organization, all the different areas, and I think we've always, I've worked in a large corporate environment too, where we'll make a business case for something, and might be a new supply chain system, it might be a new way of working, a new market to enter, and we'll do a business case on that. And when it comes up to, when these things are done, rarely do they, sometimes they do, but rarely do they show, the kind of returns that we're saying are evidenced by having a more diverse workforce that has been given to us and told to us for, and then again, I know Torin talked about this in January, for years. Harvard, Stanford, we've got chief executives globally paying tens of thousands of dollars to go on courses, to buy into research that shows this kind of return. And yet, when it comes to people, whether that be hiring a more engaged organization drives better results, more diverse organization drives better results. Here's the evidence. We do absolutely nothing about it. And I would just throw in a challenge, and I'd like to understand your responses. Experts, I think, can help us navigate and really truly understand how to get on that page, get on the song sheet, and help us deal with, I think, sometimes as leaders, our insecurities around it, because the chorus is loud right now. It's become far more challenging, I think, for individuals to really think about what we're doing, think about what difference we can make, and think about our own complicitness in this. But will it make a difference? Will this really make a difference? Because if you've got a leader in an organization or leaders in an organization, large organizations that have big impact, if Harvard, Stanford research, business case, social cases that are, emotionally charged, that really cut to the core, if none of that makes a difference, then how on earth do we leverage experts to make the difference? How do we make that change? What is it that's going to change that by bringing experts in, which I believe in?
Can I jump in? Can I jump in, Garrett? You packed a lot in there, so I'm going to try to pull a little bit out. I'll leave some for Melinda and for Brandi, but how we're going to do it, we'll do it. I think when we have these conversations around diversity and inclusion, and I'm doing that for short, oftentimes the deference is that we are penalizing and or being punitive to white men. And while you all absolutely deserve a good portion of that heat is something that should be spread around. So when we look in HR, for the most part, is largely populated with women. HR has something to do with compensation being slid across the table in an offer letter. So if women are sliding offer letters across the table via email to other women, knowing that they are undercompensating them against their male colleagues, other colleagues, then they are equally as complicit in why we have a gap in pay equality. When we have the conversation, we are normally thinking about it through the lens of, oh, it's a man's problem. No, it's our problem. So when you ask, how do we do it? We do it by holding every single person accountable. That is the only way that we do it. We are well beyond the time of allowing that lip service to suffice. I am going to trust but verify. So if you are in a role and you have some degree of responsibility over people and their compensation, how policies are levied, administrative review, recognition, whatever it is, I'm holding you accountable. Period. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to challenge people that are on this stream that are in the DEI space or have some allyship to the DEI work. I'm going to challenge them. The next time your organization says we're going to do unconscious bias training, ask them why. Ask them why. Why are we going to do that? Why is that the go-to? Why is that the default? Because we've done that.
Yeah, precisely.
So
many times.
Let's do something substantive. Like allow a consultant to come in and rip that tranquilizer of pause out of their forearm. Because that's exactly what they've been doing. You got hiring managers that are sitting around saying that chasing diversity and inclusion is a lowering of the bar. You started this conversation with a quote, and it was akin to the meritocracy conversation. But I've heard that for my 30 professional years. I've heard the meritocracy comment for 30 plus years. No more. I'm holding people accountable.
I love what Torin.
Yeah.
Sorry, Torin. I was cracking up over here because you're speaking my language. I think a couple of things too, that we have to think about is, and you already mentioned this, Torin, is who are we focusing on? I think that right now in the DEI space, there's too much blaming, there's too much shaming, and there's too much lip service, even from those people that are well-meaning allies and well-meaning professionals, and they've gone and given themselves a PhD in DEI in a couple of months this year, and all of a sudden they're woker than everybody else. And then they want to tell you, as what you should be doing rather than focusing on their role and their influence inside of the organization within their role. And so while they're pointing the finger at leadership or whoever they're pointing the finger at, what can you do in your specific role? Because when you talk about DEI, I think a lot of people too, unfortunately, are focusing on the D, right? The diversity piece. But really, we should be focusing on equity first and foremost. There are so many companies that want to brownify their organizations. And quite frankly, their organizations are not actually inclusive. There aren't systems and processes in place to make sure that they're ready for the type of diversity they're trying to get. But if we make sure that it looks like we're diverse, people may assume that we're equitable too, and that's not the case. The D and the E in DEI is not, created equal, so to speak. And I think the last thing is too, organizations cannot do surgery on themselves. That's what they're trying to do. They are using copycat methods, just like was previously mentioned. Oh, I've had companies reach out. Oh, they tell us what they need. Or we want unconscious bias training, and we need a little bit of anti-racism, and we need a little bit of, well, actually, let's do an assessment. Let's look at data. Have you figured out maybe some of the challenges, the weaknesses within your particular organization? Oh no, we haven't done that, but we know our competitors doing unconscious bias training, so we want that. I've had prospective clients argue back, and I use argue lightly, but essentially push back because they just want what they want. And then they wonder why we're having these same conversations over and over again. And quite frankly, not to say this in this way, but the majority of the time, these are white professionals. So at what point are we able to submit to expertise and be grounded and say, hey, just like I'm not going to tell my doctor what surgery and how to do the surgery, I'm not going to do that in DEI. This industry in this field is a professionalized field. And so reading White Fragility, reading a couple of articles and a couple of Netflix, because now they've made your homepage, has African-American everything on it, a couple of documentaries, that's not going to do the job. And so at some point you have to understand where your gaps are, where your blind spots are, and be willing to allow someone to help you actually do the right things. But for some reason, there are some organizations that they just don't get it, and they want what they want. They don't care about the impact or the lack of impact that it will have. And I think that's unfortunate, but there's so much power that individuals have within their own roles and their organizations. They need to focus on themselves rather than focusing on everybody else. And I think a lot of change can happen pretty quickly in that way.
I think you said a lot in that. And what I continue to hear and agree with completely is root cause. Don't just surface it, get into the data, get into what's meaningful, and you have to hold everybody accountable in all of our roles, regardless if I'm, the one that's, reception greeting people, or I'm the CEO of the company. We all play a role in this, but I couldn't agree more. You've got to get into the root and the data, and if you're going to make it more sustainable, it takes that, and it takes expertise. And by no means are most people experts in this field.
Yeah, some great comments. We're going to start the poll shortly, but some great comments there. But yes, your observations, Dr. Brandi, around, I love that saying, a degree in diversity, I think you said, and organizations trying to brownify their organizations. I was actually watching the video that Torin was doing, I think did recently, talking about how we're not thinking broadly enough anyway, in terms of D and I and how that includes community. And there were some fascinating things that came out of that. What struck me about that response was how human, the call to be human and solve this problem a human way, and for leaders to be completely transparent and completely open. The phrase, bring your whole self to work, which is one that came out in the video. I started in HR 32 years ago, and probably about 3 or 4 years in, somebody said that it was, we need to start thinking about people bringing their whole self to work, which 30 years ago would have been a completely different alien concept. But we've been talking about that again for a long time. But again, we seem to be wanting to do that selectively, and we're not really human about it. In fact, I'd go as far as to say human traits that we hear a lot about now in leadership. Josh Burson talks about the new leaders of today are now empathetic, they're transparent, they're authentic, and so on. Those traits have been seen as weak traits in leaders for many years. You've got to actually be quite tough, and you've got to be, distance yourself from your team. You can't be your authentic you. You can't. And for me personally, I think that's one of the reasons we're here today, because we don't have those human-centered leaders.
But Gareth, even when you say that, when you describe the way that leadership has to be, that they should be aggressive and they should be loud and they should be tough and lack emotion. When a woman does that, we see the woman as being problematic.
Yes, absolutely.
We categorize them as being hard to work with. We see them as being, and if she's a black woman, then she's uppity. she's all of these other things. So it becomes even more when we start to look at underrepresented audiences, when we simply use some of the generic definitions that we say or we ascribe to in corporate America. So even in that example right there are layers to how that definition of toughness and leadership is kind of like cascaded down.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. And again, it brings me back to how do we bring that, because we've created that, right? We've created that environment around which we gauge individuals, we gauge response. When it comes to, I think you've all talked about everybody having their, so I'm just getting a prompt on the poll. The poll results, which I'll come to in a minute, but I think you've all talked about everybody stepping up. Everybody, obviously, leaders make a big difference because they set the culture, they set the tone, they set the direction. But everybody, I guess, has a place. So, Torin, you talked about the HR person sliding that offer across the table, knowing in their mind that it's an underpaid, it's an undervalued offer. In the construct of an organization, as a non-leader or non-influential leader, a non-shareholder, for example, or a non-founder, how do we give people that strength, and how do they break out inside that organization to do that? I was reading something by somebody on the HR circuit who made a post about an HR director they talked to who had, in their organization, they had a senior leader who had behaved inappropriately around women. And that individual, she'd reported it, the individual had kind of been talked to, but ultimately nothing happened. And she was talking to that individual, and she was a female HR director, and saying, you're complicit in this, in allowing that to happen. You should have resigned if you didn't agree with it. And I hear that a lot. I've heard that a lot over the years. If you don't agree with what's going on in HR and you don't like it and you think it's culturally and it's wrong, then you should quit. And my view on that, I think now, is no, we shouldn't quit. We should stand up and point the finger. But it's really, really difficult for individuals who fear for their job. We're possibly about to go into the biggest economic crisis globally we've ever seen. How do we give people that courage to stand up in the organization?
Yeah, Gareth, I don't know if that's something that you can give, kind of like empowerment. I can't empower, Dr. Brandi. I can't empower her, but I can most certainly help her know that I am absolutely there and I'm supportive and I'm right behind her, and that, whatever hill she's going to climb, I'm going to climb that with her. I can stand with Melinda and make sure that she's not the only voice that is amplifying some microaggression or some infraction inside of the workplace. I think the way that we do that, absent of unions here in the US, we do it through employee resource groups, because there is strength in numbers. And if you have a number of individuals that are saying the same thing to leadership, the chances or the tendency for them to listen increase. I'm not saying it's absolute, but it tends to increase when there are a number of people saying, this right here is something that's not necessarily going well. Or conversely, this right here is something that we just started doing. We really enjoy it. We think it, it's healthy for our environment. It's doing wonders for the culture. Let's continue to do it, or let's amplify it, or let's see if we can figure out a way to find additional resources. So it's not always a bad thing. I just think that the result oftentimes is going to be strength in numbers. And absent of the number, you have to be able to pour into, or shall I say, pull from your core, your character. You got to pull from that. And if I know that something is wrong, if I'm the only one that is recognizing that it's wrong, I got to determine whether or not this is something that I'm willing to take a sacrifice for. And so I think in terms of sustaining where we are and moving forward, there will be some sacrifice. Individuals are going to have to sacrifice. We didn't get to Me Too because it was only men doing things that were inappropriate. We got to Me Too because, once again, a largesse of HR was silent. We got to have sacrifice. And if I see the infraction happening, I'm calling out the infraction, I'm calling out the aggressor, and I'm looking sideways over here at HR like, what the hell are you going to do? That's exactly what I'm doing. So I know it's a challenge for a lot of organizations to bring somebody like me in because they don't want that truth serum. But I'm giving you the truth serum. There's nothing that I'm going to say to you that is not going to be true. You can challenge it. We may decide to go a different way, but I'm not there just to blow things up. I'm there to optimize and to make them better. And part of my responsibility as that surgeon that Dr. Brandi has referred to is to make sure that I am operating at an extremely high level in my practice.
But I think the voices are there. If you looked at Glassdoor, Indeed, if you're doing polling inside of your company, like we have a one voice, right? So are you listening? But I think the second part is, what are you doing with it, right? Because listening, it's there. If you open your eyes and you just look around you, we have social media, everything is there, right? That there is, what is the reputation of the employer is pretty evident by what the voice of the employees say. But what you do about it and the actions you take is where we really need to be digging deeper on, and then asking ourselves about, what is at the root of that and what actions do we take? And I love the examples of, we're all complicit if we do nothing. If we know and we see and we do nothing, we're all complicit.
And I think HR is in a pretty tough place right now. Just the human resources industry. I think that in general, they're really going to have to tighten it up, for lack of a better term. They have not been afforded as much, quote, power within organizations sometimes, and they really need to justify their role. And I think that human resource body, there are some companies where they are working in an inequitable way. And so it's hard to hold HR accountable when they're part of the inequities in the organization. And so I think but the great thing is that's an opportunity, right? But the other thing is they need advising, human resource professionals and leaders in that talent management space. And like we're talking about wages. I mean, anyone in that sort of HR body, they need advising at this point. Who are the people behind them to help them navigate? Because sometimes they can be between a rock and a hard place. But going back to your other point, Gareth, about, courage, employees right now really need to educate themselves. These sort of miscellaneous threats of, I might get retaliated against and I might get it's representative of, it's a real fear. I get it. But I've heard that time and time again, and I go, well, do you know your policy? What's your dispute resolution process at your company? Well, what's this? And sometimes employees there is a process in place, but they're still not going to do it because A, B, C, D. So, we have to hold everyone accountable at all levels, and there is going to be some sacrifice. But at the end of the day, right is right and wrong is wrong. And so at what point have we gotten to a place where we allow anyone, especially at our workplaces, where we are there, it's transactional. You're there to provide a service, and there are some things and some guarantees that are in place. This is business. It's not personal. And there's so much personalization happening right now in this DEI space and with regard to equity on all sides that I think we really need to go back to just equity for all. If it doesn't make sense for one group, don't apply it to another group. If it, you have to be able to be very disciplined in this space. And when thinking about DEI, so many people have taken this on as a personal passion project this year, all of a sudden. And oh gosh, I'm just feeling, I feel so bad for this vulnerable population. And it's like a side project to them. But this is really about equity for every single person, and you living an equitable lifestyle and being a demonstration of that. So I think when you're talking about courage and some of the challenges that come with people kind of speaking up, it's representative of the company culture, and companies have to keep it real right now in terms of really what is your true company culture. I don't care what's on the website. I don't care what these little values in this mission statement is, but how do you all operate and how do you respond when there are issues? Do you sweep them under the rug? Do you not follow through? And I think employees need to really educate themselves on what their rights are so that it's not emotional. It's not anything. Yes, you can slander your employer or out your employer online, but how about get your facts together? Walk into whoever's office you need to walk into, let them know that you pulled the handbook, and according to the handbook, these are my rights. This is what I'm expecting. And if you're not going to do that, this is going to be my next step. It's very simple here if you're the right. And so we really need to, I think, tighten it up a lot and understand who has what power and who does not, because I think we're imagining that people have a little bit more power than they really do. And when it comes to this DEI space, there's a lot that we can do, even by using policy and procedure laws, even if we have to. I hate to say that, to make sure that we're treated fairly and equitably in the workplace.
I see questions coming up in the chat. Or if it's up to us to go.
I was just going to say we should get to questions because we've got about 10 minutes left. So the poll results, by the way, for those that participate in the poll, how confident are we that this is now an era for change? 44% feel confident, 36% still feel that they're not confident will change, and then there's 20% kind of in the middle. So if that was a Brexit vote, that would be definitely for confidence for change, as per the British public. Let's go to some questions. There's some great stuff there. We could probably talk about this for 2 hours, but let's have a couple of questions from the audience. So one of the first ones: do companies have enough DEI data to know if they are making progress? Melinda, speaking from a corporate perspective.
So we have the data, clearly on the statistics on whether or not we are underrepresented minorities, and do we match what is in the marketplace, right? So what's the available labor market, and how transparent are we on that, right? So that's one company question that I would be asking of all. Regarding the one that's probably you really have to do more listening is inclusive indexes and other areas that I would tell you. For my company at Schneider Electric, we do one voice, we do have listening, but is it enough to say that we have like an inclusive index? I think that's part of the next step inside of that. And I think in the questions too, you can't just look at things like your hiring metrics, you have to look at the development, you have to look at leadership roles, you have to look at, right? And that's very evident. What percentage of your leadership roles are diverse, whether it's gender, ethnicity, it's that to me is very evident for all to see, but you have to have some level of, I think, commitment on either mirroring the markets you're in or exceeding them.
Okay.
I'd caution companies against tokenism. I think there's so much tokenism gone wild this year. Everybody, on LinkedIn between August and October who was African American was all of a sudden promoted in new board positions, new chair positions out of the blue for some reason this year. And so I think that we just have to be mindful of sort of cherry picking, just like it wouldn't sound right to say, we really have to make sure we have more, white women. We got to hire more white women or white males. That sounds a little cringy to some people. Then we have to be careful of not going out and looking for specific people from a specific background. It's about really diversifying and making your recruiting process as equitable as possible, because what I'm finding on the back end is a lot of professionals that are coming to me in private and they're victims of tokenism. They are there to make the company look good, to make their department look good, and they have absolutely no power once they get there. So just a slight caution on that too with the diversity hiring piece.
Yeah, one of the great point. Certainly a lot of activity on that. One of the other questions actually in here is that there's been a huge push on hiring, and there is generally on diversity hiring, and for the last 2 decades, our notion of talent has always been, generally speaking, external. Right? Since the War for Talent paper was written, we've become obsessed with hiring external talent. We want to get talent in the organization. It only exists externally, and we don't promote from within. And so the question of the audience is, are we focusing on too much on hiring and not enough on promoting, developing the diverse talent that we may have already in the organization? Because there seems to be, I guess what they're implying is there's a ceiling on those folks already.
I think the answer could be yes. I'm sorry, Melinda. I apologize. Go ahead.
No, the only thing I was just going to say is we do believe in equal opportunity for all. And one thing that we did this year, actually 2 years now, is what we call open talent market. So using AI and intelligence to have a platform that everybody puts in their profile and matches basically And it really has brought about, I think, a different, because in the past, a lot of times it's who do you know, right? So yeah, even though you have promotional opportunity inside the company, there's still a very strong relational. And so by using Open Talent Market, it's really brought about an awareness level of what are those opportunities and using more of that matching to facilitate that opportunity for all.
Yeah, Garrett, and I was just going to say that it's not an either or proposition. For most organizations, it's an and proposition. They need to be focused on the development and the hiring of individuals, but they also need to be doing that throughout the entire organization. Far too many companies focus on hiring at the lower levels, but when you look at the leadership and the board of directors, there are true lacking of diversity dimensions. And so I think that it's not an either or proposition. It's really about being committed to how do we make example? How do we model what it is that we say is important? And so if we are inside of an organization and our board of directors is 10, okay, and no one's seat is up, then get in the room and extend and change the charter and the bylaws of the organization so now we can make it 12. And go out and find 2 individuals so we can add some diverse dimensions to our board of directors. We have the power. Brandi talked about that a moment ago. We are deferring to power as if in many instances we can't do things when in fact we really can.
Yeah.
So we need to be focused through the entire organization, not just at the bottom and bringing people in, not just at the level of learning and development and inspiring people to become promoted and to grow their tenure with the organization, but saying to ourselves, we need to put more diversity on our board of directors and in senior leadership roles, because that will model what we say is important. And that modeling says a lot more than a press release does.
Yeah, great comments. We're getting close to the end of time, but there's a comment which goes back to your statement, Dr. Brandi, which is, which companies do you feel are leading the way with impact, not optics? So across the 3 of you, could you give us, do you see any that are really standing out at the moment?
I would sort of answer this question rather than saying which specific companies are giving names, especially because we're kind of in like a copycat DEI, phase right now because it's so new to some people and some companies. But I would say any companies that are using data. I love Melinda's example of using technology and AI to really truly make sure that some decisions are as equitable as possible. I think that any organization that is stepping outside of just their own talent for DEI. So hiring somebody like a Torin, making sure that they have external expertise there rather than elevating the few African-American employees they have to teach everybody else about this, or elevating the LGBTQ voices or whatever, right? But I think that companies that are focused on equity for all, I think that this year there's a lot of distraction, quite frankly, of people going fast and pouring a lot of resources into just sort of racial equity, which is a part of equity. So, but what about the people with disabilities? What about every other group? And sort of strategy, I would say, over any individual company, because this is a living, breathing process out here. But there are a few that stick out. But for this group, I would focus on maybe looking at things that the companies are doing right, for sure.
Yeah. Anybody else? Either of you guys, Melinda?
No, I mean, I think it just goes back. Look at the results of the company, right? Look at what they, not only what are they declaring, but what are the results? What is the percentage of their employees? What is the contributions they're making to their communities? Where are they standing up? Whether they're publicly traded or privately traded. So the results are what matter. And their commitments. The commitments do matter. I think where they declare it matters, but look at the results with the commitments. And then that will tell you what you need to know, because every company is different, and finding companies that you can also have an impact on, right? So maybe companies that don't reflect what they need to reflect, but then can you be that change person that comes in and helps drive that? So I think lots of opportunities for all of us.
Yeah, last thing that I'll say on that is I rather than focus on the organizations, I love how you frame that, Dr. Brandi Proctor. I think it's important that we have leaders that make a declarative statement as to how important diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are. That statement doesn't have to be external facing, but it should be something that permeates through the entire organization. Number two, leadership that says we are going to reallocate resources. That means headcount and dollars. Look at how those headcount is aligned in terms of tackling the mission that we say is extremely important. And then how are we supporting that with the resources that they need? How are we supporting that with a different measurement of time? You know, we are not going to get to this result overnight. And then last but not least, leadership that holds everyone in the organization accountable. Do like Larry Fink did with BlackRock for his December 2018 shareholders letter. He said that you will be held accountable. It's not a quota, it's a target. We have a goal. We want to do something different. You're going to be held accountable, your performance against that goal. I think if we do those three things, we'll see a monumental difference in 2021.
And okay, so we're at 56 minutes, so we've got literally a couple of minutes left. So given everything we've said, fascinating conversation, the time flies, I don't know where it goes, but and I think we could talk about this again, and hopefully we will actually. It'd be great to stay in touch and because I've got 1,000 questions in my head about making change. But going back to I guess the ultimate question in our research report, do we believe, what are your hopes for 2021? You know, if you're going to look forward now, we've had an unprecedented overused term, but 2020, I think we're all hopefully looking forward to seeing the back of it. But what, you know, as a sentence, a statement from each of you, what were your hopes for around this that you'd like to see 2021 emerge?
Well, I'll go first real quick. I want to see people wear a mask and we get COVID under control. I want to see the babies back with their parents. And I want to see us very serious about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Thanks, Tom.
I'll say, as a final thought, you know, people love to learn but hate to change. There are people that will study DEI, 2 ways to Sunday and will not actually change anything in their lives. Less doing, more being. It's not about doing allyship or doing DEI. Just be inclusive, just be equitable, just show up that way every single day as consistently as possible. Stop calling other people out and just focus on changing your behaviors day in and day out. And I think that that's how we will be able to see a high impact and see the sustainable change. The last thing I'll say is just know your weak points, know your blind spots and your gaps. You cannot do surgery on yourself. Call on others to support and help you so that you can get there faster to the final destination for making sure your workplace is as equitable as possible.
Melinda,
I think they've said it
final
all.
statement.
I mean, it's opportunities like this to continue the conversation, be openly curious, be vulnerable, and commit to action. No matter how small it seems, we all can make a difference.
Great. Right, we're out of time, guys. Look, thank you very much for the debate. It's great to, well, obviously we've kind of met, Torin, but it's great to meet you all virtually. Have a great break. Hopefully there's some powerful messages. If we get more questions, we might share them with you anyway afterwards. And anybody who has further questions, please forward them to us. You can go to our website. You can watch this again later because it will be available. We will definitely share it, and I'd obviously ask you guys to share it too. And hopefully we can make that poll a reality and make some significant changes in 2021. I do think it's a bit of a watershed moment, and I, as much as all of you, hope that we will convince people and give people I guess people will find the courage, not give them the courage, but find the courage to act and to make a difference, because I think it is about action. Even small actions make big differences. So thank you everybody for watching. I hope it's inspired you and that you've got some I guess in some small way inspired by the conversation. Sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, but hopefully during the conversation we touched on most of the things that everybody wanted to hear. And yeah, thanks for your time everyone, and we will see you again hopefully on another similar debate. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.